Hey everyone, welcome back. We're in hour 4, if you can believe it, of the Caring Conference, Our Resilient Spirit. And I'm thrilled and delighted to introduce you to Bruce, who's going to tell us more about resilience as it relates to his personal life. So Bruce, thanks so much for being here. Take it away.
Yeah. So I'm Bruce McIntyre. I've this summer, I guess it'll be 17 years as officially caregiver for my wife who has dermatomyositis. Say that 5 times fast. Um, and It's been up and down over the years. And I also work as the CEO of the Parkinson Foundation of Oklahoma. I've spoken at several of Denise's events, and it's been a pleasure to know Denise for quite a few years now. So, anyway, glad to share today. So, I'm going to give a little intro here to just the whole idea of resilience, and which you're already getting into. So, if you want to plug into the chat room some of your own uh, definitions for resilience, if you have one, I'll roll through a few of mine. Um, One is, and this comes really from Froma Walsh originally, way back when. She was one of the early and initial resilience researchers, and hers is all about rebounding from adversity. There are others that say things like bouncing forward, though most folks in talking about resilience, I think, feel more like they are crawling or grappling forward, not bouncing. Um, and then in regards to the upward spiral notion, I like the one that's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I did a blog article on this a few weeks ago and a little research and realized that actually the more common usage is 1 step forward, 2 steps back, which seems way more negative than I'm interested in. So I really prefer the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or if you have 2 steps back, then 3 steps forward. Um, but sometimes you do get punched back a ways. And then there's just this notion of not quitting. You know, Sometimes your greatest way to exhibit resilience is just that you keep carrying on day to day, week to week, year to year. You just keep going. And so that's pretty, these are some of the ones that I think of when I think about resilience. And I can't actually see the chat the way my screen's displaying. So if anything pops up, just share that, Denise.
Yep. So Jody is writing that resilience is persistence.
Absolutely. Good word.
This morning after the presentations earlier, I just figured out another definition for me, and that is resilience is remaining in love with my life regardless of my life's circumstances.
Right. Yeah, these are good. I like it. Um, and so I would just want to share some components, some actions, some questions that are kind of along the path to embracing resilience. And so one is I really like this idea of in order to exercise your capacity for resilience, you must first face reality. And so when it comes to facing reality, um, there's some hard realities. It's not something that you do once. Often it's something that you do many times. And we found with my wife's illness that we don't just face reality once upon her diagnosis, but we have faced reality. It seems like every 6 months or so, there's a new change, there's a new situation. And we're wondering, what do we do next? Maybe a medication quits working, a scenario changes. And so we're consistently facing reality. But here's a story that has nothing to do with caregiving at all. But I do think it's pretty funny. So my son, he's 16 now, but when he was 3 years old, um, I realized that I had never bought my own toothbrush in my whole life. And so I then bought my first toothbrush. I decided to buy an expensive toothbrush and like $100 toothbrush. Never had an electric toothbrush. And and so I did that. And had it for a few days, came home from work and when I came home from work, I noticed that my son had my brand new electric toothbrush in his mouth, slobbering it up with 3-year-old slobber. And so I just about lost it. And I'm trying to explain to him the finer points of hygiene and why this is not acceptable. And my daughter, who was about 5 at the time, walks into the room, and she's kind of an observer, and so she came in, she's listening, she's watching, and she says, oh, does he have your toothbrush in his mouth again? I'm like, again? So I'm not the only one using my toothbrush. This is a difficult reality. You really generally want to be the only person using your toothbrush. But in this case, I was definitely not. So that was a hard reality to face. But it set me free to buy a toothbrush safe that I mounted on the wall with a lock. No, I didn't really do that, but I did take good care to hide my toothbrush from that point on. So facing difficult realities, I really think that is part of exercising your capacity for resilience. And the thing is, we don't like for people to know that we have problems. I think most of us would just prefer that everyone think we've never had a single problem ever. And life has just gone swimmingly, but it's just not true. I love this quote from Dr. Frumwell Walsh, who says, no family is problem free. What distinguishes healthy families is not the absence of problems or suffering, but rather their coping and problem solving abilities. And so that's what we're doing today and tomorrow is we are putting tools in the toolbox. We're gleaning ideas here and there. And if you come through this and you glean, a handful of ideas that you can take action on, then, you're that much more set ahead to have better coping and problem solving abilities. I love this quote also about problems from M. Scott Peck. This is one we mentioned the other day. Denise he says in this book from probably like 30 years ago, but it's a great quote. The problems do not go away. They must be worked through, or else they remain forever a barrier to the growth and development of the spirit. So one of my least things to do is to work through a problem. but in the upward spiral, on the path, as you build your resilience through maybe weeks, months, or years or decades of struggle, I think that dealing with the problems in as healthy a way as you can really puts you on the right course. So a few questions, and these may be just for your reflection. They may be something you want to think about later, or it may be something you want to chime in on. I found these to be good questions. One is, what is the truth of your current situation? Just what's the truth of it? Because sometimes we want to tell anything but the truth of it. I want to just think only what I want to think about it. I only want to see what I want to see about it. But what's the truth of the current situation? And then, what are you doing or not doing that's perpetuating the problem? And what are you doing or have ceased doing that's creating good? And I found with myself, and I think it's true of most people, in any given problematic situation, we're doing a lot of the right things. If it's a new diagnosis, you say, what, we're seeing the best doctor we can possibly see in our area. We're taking our medicine. We're on track. We've gotten the equipment we need, etc. But there's usually something that is perpetuating part of the problem. And that's a more difficult thing to acknowledge. But as we acknowledge that, then we are able to pinpoint it, put our finger on the pulse of it, and, maybe make a change, make an adjustment, pivot a little bit in that one area. And so these are questions my wife and I have found ourselves asking ourselves many times over as things change, as realities shift. What's the truth of it? What are you doing for the good? What are you doing that may be perpetuating the problem? So I think these are the kinds of questions that can really, really set you free. Now, one of the things about living into this upward spiral of resilience is to think about your system, and your system includes all kinds of things. I mean, your system is your personality, it's your conflict style, it's the dynamics of your family, it's all kinds of things. But one thing I really like, and I encourage people to do, is to do a resilience genogram of your family. I don't know if you've ever done a normal genogram of your family where you go back 3 or 4 um, generations and say, okay, these are my parents and their parents, or whatever you know of your people. And some of us know more, some of us know less about that. But to ask this question back 2 or 3 or 4 generations, what adversity have your people faced in the past? How did they survive or overcome? And you inevitably, if you go back a few generations, will find people in your family that you would rather not mention. And you will find people in your family that you think, wow, they did great. They dealt with so much difficulty, and yet look what they did. Look how they came out. So when I did this little exercise for my own family, and I did it on one side, and I kind of looked back, and I came across my great grandma Seeley. And all I'd ever known about great grandma Seeley, or all I really ever remembered, was I knew that she was married at a very young age, rural Tennessee, in her teens, and that she had had 2 husbands who died prematurely. She had had 13 children. My grandfather was the oldest of the second batch of children. And so, not surprisingly, he only had an only child. He had plenty of kids, I guess. But one of the interesting things is the stories that are told is of her playing the piano, letting the grandkids stay up way too late, of being fun loving, of having a great sense of whimsy, of making lemonade and cookies, and then all the grandkids slept in the same bed, and the one grandkid inevitably peed the bed, every time. And anyway, all these fun loving, funny stories. But then as I went through this, I also came to find out that the other side of her story is that she was, a young wife and mother, lost 2 husbands. One of those children, she diapered and cared for his whole life, I think until around age 40 or so. So it was essentially a very intense caregiver. And that side of the equation looks like the recipe for a miserable life. And yet, the stories that are told at Christmas and Thanksgiving by the family are of this fun loving, whimsical, musical person, same person. So I think that there's a real value in looking back through your people, or even just looking back through your own life and saying, what adversity have I faced in the past? How did I get through it that time? And maybe you did great, maybe you didn't do so great. So if you didn't do so great, what do you do different? Or if this person in your family didn't do so great, what can you learn from that? And it's not that they consistently always failed. They probably had their triumphs as well. But I think it's a really interesting way to look at the upward spiral of resilience and put a really wide perspective on it. And what I take away from some of that is that my DNA is that I can do this. My DNA is that I can do hard things. I can get through adversity. I don't want to. I would rather not. I highly, strongly prefer that life be easy. But the truth is, it's not always, especially in caregiving scenarios. So I think that this is an interesting little exercise. And again, it's something, I don't know if you really, right now in this moment's the time to do it, but maybe it's one you want to hang on to and revisit and spend a little time with. I love this quote from Helen Keller, who said, "The entire world is full of suffering. It is also full of overcoming it." And I see that all the time. In my work with the Parkinson Foundation of Oklahoma, I meet Parkinson folks all the time. None of them asked for it. Their caregivers, their family members did not ask for it, but that's where they are. Our organization only exists because they exist. We exist to help them. And the beauty of it is that we get to know people who are living through unexpected adversity. And they're finding all kinds of ways to get through it, through groups, through therapies. And their whole life is not defined by one disease. You know, many diseases say this, and we say it a lot too, is that you may have Parkinson's, but Parkinson's doesn't have you, you know, or whatever, you know, if you're talking about dementia or heart problems or whatever, well, you may have it, but it doesn't have you. You are much more than that one thing. That's only one thing. You're not defined by this one moment of crisis. This one moment of crisis is part of your story, but it's not your whole story. And so I think that looking back, doing the resilience genogram is a powerful exercise. I encourage you to do that. And then, you know, here's the thing: when significant illness comes into your context, and dreams and plans change, they maybe even become more limited. And you say, "Wow, we were going to go there, but there's no way we can do that with a wheelchair." Or there's no way we can do that. We spend so much money on these other things now. I think these are still questions worth asking. Dreaming and planning again. What is your here? What is your there? And you still plan the steps from there back to here, but some of the goals change. They become a little bit less about the quantity and a little more about the quality. I'll give you two examples. One example is my wife in her early experience with her illness. Again, this summer, that'll actually be 17 years. Can't believe it. But again, our son was very young. And from the time that her disease affects her muscles and her skin, but it makes her really weak. And so she could not pick up our son. She couldn't pick up our toddlers. They would come and get in on the sofa and get in her lap, that type of thing. But she couldn't pick them up. And so along the way, she was prescribed with physical therapy. Went to a great physical therapist, actually a friend of ours who owns a physical therapy place. In fact, we were so fortunate that at one point he said, "Your money is no good here anymore. We'll take what the insurance gives us, but we're not taking any more of your money." And we're like, "Okay, that's incredible. That's amazing. Thank you so much." And then we were in somewhat of a Christmas scenario. Kids are unwrapping gifts. My son, who at this point was about big enough no one could pick him up, you know, he's around 2 or 3 years old, and he sees something from us. He looks at my wife, his mom, and he runs to her, but then kind of stops and realizes, "Oh, I don't need to jump on her because I might knock her over," or, you know, and she grabbed him and struggled, but she picked him up, and it was not lost on the room. We all stopped and were like, "Wow, that was a good moment." And it was an especially good moment because when she started physical therapy, the physical therapist did not ask her, "How many pounds do you want to lift? How many exercises do you want to do?" He said, "What do you want to be able to do?" And she said, "I want to pick up my son." And that was the day that it happened. So that's no one's goal unless you can't do it. One of our Parkinson patients, who's passed away now, but a few years ago, he was very active with us and came to a lot of our programs. In Oklahoma, I'm coming up to you out of Oklahoma City, and there's a little river along one side of the city, and there's a development of kind of a river adventure sports kind of a thing. And part of that is a zip line that goes across that river and then back across. And one day as I came into Loud Crowd, which is something we provide through our organization to help with speech therapy for Parkinson patients. And he came into Loud Crowd and he said, "You guys won't believe what I did." And he was 78 years old with Parkinson's. He said, "It was my grandson's birthday and I went and I ziplined across the river and back." And I thought, wow, I haven't ziplined across the river and back. And this guy's 78 with Parkinson's, well into Parkinson's, not early on. And he did it. So I thought, okay, well, I've got to do it for sure. But I was so proud of him, that he would do that. That was just phenomenal to me. And so then when we did take a kid on a birthday and I did zip line across the river and back, and it was okay. But see, that's the kind of goal, zip lining across the river, picking up your son. These things aren't necessarily the goals you have when you're healthy and well, but if there's a challenge within your adversity, go ahead and set the goal that means something to you, no matter how big or small it is, and pursue it. Exercising. Well, let me just go back on that. Anybody have a goal like that? If you do, just chunk it into the chat room, and Denise, let me know, because again, the way my screen's displaying, I can't see it. And you don't have to. Maybe that's another one to chew on for a while, percolate on. But if you do have a goal like that, it'd be interesting to hear it. I like this. Exercising resilience does not exempt you from facing more giants. It equips you to face those giants with greater confidence. So here's another question for you. You could chime in on either one, a goal or what is your giant? What is a recurring giant that shows up in your world? And, it's one thing for it to be a one-time giant, but it's those recurring giants that are so annoying. It just won't go away, or you just can't seem to lick it, it keeps coming back. Here's one that I think about sometimes is forgiveness. I would like to say that I have forgiven and I did it and it was great and we were done with that. But until the next time you see them, right? My wife and I, some years ago, had it was a problematic situation. And we were in a meeting with someone who was in a position to give us some advice. And the person giving us advice said, in a very Oklahoma way, she said, "I think you have a burr under your saddle." I was like, okay, I have a burr under my saddle. What do you mean? And so I think there's something you need to let go of, or you need to forgive, or you need to deal with. And so my wife and I talked about it and we thought, well, I guess doggone it, she was right. And so my wife came to one conclusion and decided the action she needed to take. I got kind of nerdy about it and read 3 books about forgiveness, which was extremely helpful. And I wound up taking action on mine as well. But it was, for me, a recurring giant that was hindering my well-being. And I think in caregiving scenarios, there's a lot of unspoken anger and resentment. And so I would be very surprised if, at least in the top 3 or 5 list for most folks of things that recur, would not be some similar forgiveness type issue. Pretty common. Most of us deal with that kind of thing. One of the best books on forgiveness, by the way, that I've ever read, and I've worked through it now about 3 times, is the Book of Forgiveness by Desmond Tutu. And it is fantastic. I did all the exercises. I carried around rocks. I did, the whole thing. And it was just phenomenal. And I've done it on 3 different levels, 3 different times, and it's been very effective all 3 times. So I'd highly recommend just buy the book and do the book. And it'll probably take you a couple months to work through it, but very helpful. Anyone have any other giants or recurring giants or? things just won't go away.
I think mine is still anger. So I talked in my presentation about really having an anger that came out when I was a kid. And I think that I've controlled how that anger comes out for the most part, it still does, but I think it's now self-directed. So trying to get over anger with self is still, I think, my giant. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, it comes in many forms, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's between you and someone else, but and even uh, anger or resentment or forgiving yourself, that's one of the most difficult things. It's one of the things I love about that book, by the way. It has a place for that. Has a chapter that really gets into forgiving yourself as well. Pretty
I just,
powerful.
I love the question, what is your giant? It's such a great question. It really gives you this focus on what is it that reoccurs in my life that I just want to have greater confidence in dealing with.
Yep. And we all have them, and we have different ones at different times. Things we sometimes it's just we don't know enough about this, you know, and we don't have the knowledge to deal with our giant, or we don't know how to vanquish it, you know.
And
So,
I also think what's interesting about this question is we resent our giant too. Why do I still have to deal with this giant? And instead of judging the giant, it's this, okay, the giant is a part of my life. I just want to have greater confidence to manage the giant when he or she shows up.
yep, that's right. So I think the more specific you can be in putting your finger on the pulse of what that giant is, and the more specific you can be about it, uh, the better equipped you are to then do something about it. All right, let's roll on to other easy questions. All right, so you'll become resilient because of your problems, not due to the absence of your problems. So I don't know if you found this to be true, but I certainly have. And it's almost kind of cliche that we tend to grow in the times of challenge. When the pain is higher, we're forced to grow. We're forced to think differently. We're forced to attack the problems differently. So it's not the absence of our problems necessarily that strengthen our capacity and our exercising of resilience, but it is the problems. So again, I don't like that at all, not one bit, but I do think it's true. Um, and the thing that's really difficult about embracing our resilience is once we've dealt with one issue and we feel like we've put that to rest, and then we spring a leak somewhere else, you know, something else goes wrong. It's like, doggone it. Something else went wrong. Now I have to deal with this too, you know? And so that's especially difficult. I love Sarah. A number of years ago, I worked on at a fairly large nonprofit with over 100 employees in Oklahoma City. We had a little campus of about 5 buildings, and everyone was well, not everyone, but most of them were good-hearted, kind people, very compassionate. And so every cat, possum, raccoon, every critter in that part of the city got fed on our campus, you know. And finally, it became such a problem that the CEO said, "Look, we have to bring in the animal control people. We have to get rid of all these animals, and we have to, something has to happen here." And so, after a few days of that guy being around, they declared our campus critter free. And okay, everybody now stop putting out all the food and all that. Okay. Well, the very next morning, the CFO sends out an email with a picture of one of those cats that evidently was pregnant and had a litter of kittens on the second floor right outside her window on a really large ledge. So, in my opinion, I would call that a resilient cat. This cat survived the animal control people coming in and doing their thing, and then lo and behold didn't find behind a shrub or what. No, went on the second floor of a building and had a litter of kittens. Incredible. And so the CEO said, well, okay, except for that cat and those kittens, and we can be good to them, and we'll all take them home when they get old enough, you know. And so, but I think of that, and I think, this, if you, to embrace your capacity for resilience is not just to get through one hard thing. It is that you continue to keep going. You continue to keep getting back up. Even if you get knocked down for days or weeks or months and you think, man, maybe I'm knocked out. And then you say, no, I'm not. Not today. I'm back up. You're still resilient. You carried on. And once you've gone through these kinds of experiences, the darndest thing is that you may actually find yourself in a perfect position to help other people. And so a few good questions for you here as well are, one is, how is yours a story of hope? And if you can find the hope in your story, tell it. Someone needs to hear it. Now, if you cannot find the hope in your story at all, then talk to your really good confidants, your ministers, your counselors, talk to those people. But if you can find the hope in your story, someone needs to hear it. Now, I will say, early on in my wife's illness, there was a lady at our church. She had not yet found the hope in her story. And she would come up to us, and it was always the worst. I mean, it was just the worst. We would see her come and be like, get the kids get out, go, get in the car. You know, we did not want to talk to her because it was so discouraging to talk to her. But most people we've met along the way, it's actually really, really a story of hope. Folks have a story of hope. And here's a hallmark of a story of hope. Every story of hope has a big but. I mean that funny both ways. The people that I hear say, look, I got diagnosed with this, or my husband was diagnosed with that. We had to make these adjustments. We've had to deal with this, la, la, la. But that put us on a course to talk to whoever, and that turned out to be the most helpful thing we'd ever done. Or we're dealing with this, but that's not all there is to our life. We've also had some of the most beautiful and some of the funniest moments of our life, even now, in the midst of this situation. And so I love it when people can tell a story that's maybe about a paragraph. And this, again, is a great exercise. Because most of us, if someone asks us to tell our story is like 20 minutes to maybe an hour and 20 minutes. But maybe the list of people is pretty short who want to hear the whole thing. And so it's a good exercise to craft your paragraph, your 3 to 5 sentences. You know, in the sales world, they always say the elevator pitch, right? What if you just craft, because people ask sometimes in the least convenient moments. You're sitting in the doctor's office in the waiting room, and you're like, I do not want to talk to anybody. And then somebody wants to talk to you. You're like, okay. But inevitably things come up. And so over the years, I've tried to work on this to think, okay, what's our story? How do you say it succinctly? And like I could say, you know, my wife has been living with dermatomyositis for almost 17 years. It's been up and down. It's been terrible, and it's been great. But I'll tell you what, along the way, we've learned a lot from people who've lived with all kinds of adversity. And we've learned to be less judgy of people because we realize we don't know it all. And we've learned to find the beauty in life anyway. And that's what we keep trying to do. Okay, that's maybe more than 3 to 5 sentences, but you get the idea. You know, craft your little paragraph or two and put the big but in there. Here's the problem, but here's how I'm living into the upward spiral of resilience. Here's where my determination and persistence comes in. So you have the capacity for resilience today. And I've mentioned this this metaphor of the upward spiral of resilience because ultimately I think it is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, even though I will grant you sometimes it's 3 or 4 steps backwards and very slow steps forward. True enough. But I still like the metaphor. Here's the opposite of the metaphor. I went to visit someone several years ago in a nursing home. And en route to the room that I was going to, I had my social skills on autopilot. And I saw a guy in the hallway and he's just kind of slumped over. He's kind of mumbling to himself. And I thought, well, I'm not just going to walk past him and ignore him. I said, hey, how are you doing? And he said, I'm circling the drain, just circling the drain. And I thought, oh, I don't know what to say to that, and I tried to offer whatever encouragement I could, but I thought, wow, that's a tough response. That's the opposite, right? And not to say that you had never felt like you were circling the drain, but it's far better to feel like you're on the upward spiral of resilience. So what are a lot of specific moves? A lot of specific ideas here. And this actually is from an article from the APA on building resilience. A lot of these pieces are. But, and these all make sense. You probably know all of these, but all good reminders. And honestly, to work through them and just kind of do a little checklist for yourself and say, am I prioritizing relationships? Do I have one person, one or two people that I have some kind of, really good relationship with? Do I have lunch buddies or breakfast friends? Or do I have a phone friend? Do I have a neighbor that I can chat with? Do I have an outlet of a good relationship? Do I have somebody, And sometimes it comes in a support group. Sometimes it comes through a faith group. Sometimes it's through a disease group. Sometimes it's online caregiving group. Actually, Denise, while we've been on here, Wendy, Wendy in our office, she actually is leading an online caregiver support group for Parkinson caregivers. This is our day for that. And so that's some people's group. But it's the one-on-one relationships, and it's also the group. Now, I will grant you this. For some of us, we are more easily agitated by other people than others, right? Well, you don't have to agree or disagree, but some of you are chuckling because you are. And so when you're in a group, the risk of being in a group is there will be someone annoying in that group. But that's okay. If there's no one annoying in the group, it might be you. Okay. So faith groups, support groups, recreation groups, you need people, and it's okay. And then one of the things about operating in groups or just in relationships is, you learn to do a little bit of give and take. You learn to take yourself and others maybe not quite as seriously and say, look, we've all got problems. I used to have a boss who would come through after a particularly conflictual encounter, maybe with a client, and he would say, hey, remember, we're all weird. We're all weird in our own special ways. And we're all weird in our own special ways. Absolutely. Other ideas, take care of your body. Here's my principle for this for most folks, especially the non-exercisers and the ones that are more prone to grab Hostess than fruits and vegetables. A little bit of something is better than a whole lot of nothing. Denise, you mentioned, maybe it was in the first session today, something about your 7-minute workout. Hey, great. Take a walk. A little bit of something is better than a whole lot of nothing. I think a lot of times we don't do anything because we think we have to do a lot. But actually, we only have to do a little more consistently to really reap the benefits. And so if you were to set up, I always tell people, if you just set up, doing an arm bike and walking around the block, or if you can't walk around the block, you get on the exercise stationary bike. Just something to take care of your body. It's very difficult to come back from a session of exercise feeling the same as you did when you started. Generally speaking, you feel a little bit better when you're done. Practice mindfulness. You know, any kind of spiritual practice generally tends to bring calm. I mean, that's my goal. If I create a spiritual exercise space, my goal is that I'm going to feel personal peace, that I'm going to breathe slower, think more clearly, you know, calm down. And I mean, there are many, many examples of what to do and how to do it and many styles, but engage. And I would suggest every day a little bit, even 2 or 3 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, some little practice on a consistent basis really helps to build your sense of resilience. Avoiding negative outlets. You know, a lot of times we have our first tendency is to grab the thing that's bad for us, or if used in excess is bad for us, or to turn on the thing that is maybe doesn't speak to our better thoughts. Now there's escape, there's definitely room for escape. But just think what's your positive outlet, what's your negative outlet? And I'm not saying all TV is not bad, all Netflix, as we said earlier, not bad. Um, and all drinks and all everything, not bad. But you just have to look at how I'm doing it. Is it a positive or a negative? And when something turns from a positive to a negative, then there's a problem. But so avoiding negative outlets, helping others, and this sounds kind of counterintuitive. Um, and the best motive to help others is not so you'll feel better. The best motive to help others is to genuinely help others, and then you will actually feel better most of the time. I had an experience last week, and this has happened to me. I kid you not, 6 times now. I'm keeping count. That I've gone through a line somewhere, and someone paid for my order, and then I paid for the order of the person behind me, and so forth. And so I went through a coffee place last week in Lawton, Oklahoma, and I pull up to the window, and the person says, "The lady in front of you paid for yours." I was like, "That's awesome. That's great." And she said, "Do you want to pay for the people behind you?" I said, "Absolutely." And she said, she went to the register, she came back, and she said, "It's $28." I was like, ah, holy smokes. I was like, yeah, okay, let's do the $28. That's fine. But I was like, man, the person in front of me got off a lot better than I did. But anyway, but you know, and that's just a random act of kindness thing there. But really helping others. And that's as simple. Sometimes it's as simple as not even necessarily taking a visible action. You can send a prayer. You can send good vibes to someone. You can wish for them what you would wish for yourself. You know, pray for someone else to have health and wealth and happiness, you know, uh, or write a note, make a call, and I'm telling you, even in the most difficult moments of your own crisis, to be able to get outside of that and do even the smallest thing for another person is in fact helpful. There was a guy when we lived in Abilene, Texas, um, Wayne, who I've written about before, but Wayne had every problem in the book. I mean, he was a snaggletooth, bow-legged guy that had run a candy route his whole life. He had diabetes, among other things. He eventually lost a leg, all kinds of problems. But I'll say one of the most wonderful human beings I've ever met in my life. Because when you talk to Wayne, he was exclusively focused on you and your well-being. And it's one of those kind of deals when you left him, you were like, wait, I came to encourage Wayne, and he helped me more than I helped him. And Wayne would get on the phone. He was a phone encourager. And even after I moved from Abilene, he called me probably once a month to see how we were doing every month until he passed away. In the throes of his own crisis, he still helped other people. Now, this is much easier to tell about than it is to do when you're in your own funk. I get that. But to attempt even the smallest act of kindness for another person when you're in your own crisis is inherently a good thing to do. but it also helps you to exercise your capacity for resilience. Being proactive. You know, the question I ask myself all the time, what is the next right thing to do? What is the next right thing to do? I can't do all the things. I can't fix all the problems. Some things aren't even problems to be fixed. They're tensions to be managed. But what is the next right thing to do? You know, keep moving towards your goals. As we mentioned earlier, even small accomplishments. Keep things in perspective. Maybe you can't fix your situation, but you can change how you interpret your situation, and you can change how you respond to it. This is a great question to ask a really good friend. Say, here's my situation. Here's how I see it. Am I seeing that the right way? Is there a better way to look at this? Or am I right on? And they may say, no, it's terrible. You are right on. It's impossible. But is there a way to harness some good out of this bad? You know, learn from your past. What was helpful previously? Previous problems. What did you do? What was helpful? Seek help. Ask for a consult. I find that nobody wants to ask for help, but most of us don't mind asking for a consult. So I don't ask for help anymore. I only ask for consults from smart people and people that have been there. And so technically that's the same thing, but it makes me feel a lot better. So ask for a consult. Well, a lot of ideas there, a lot to chew on, a lot to percolate on. But I hope that maybe one or two of those ideas or stories has made a little bit of sense to you, and that it nudges you into that upward spiral of resilience. Just making one or two or three of those moves is moving you in the right direction, putting you in a position to exercise your capacity for resilience. And you definitely have enough for today. You can get to a bedtime today. You can do it. You have the capacity for resilience. Thank you.
That was awesome. So a couple comments from the chat room. So Kathy Sikorsky, our friend Kathy, is saying that she loves this ask for a consult rather than help. And both Kathy Murray, who presented before you, and Jen are giving thanks for all your insights and tips. And I love the reminder that we have enough to get to bedtime. We don't have to get through the rest of our life today. We could just get to bedtime, and that's enough.
Yeah, that's a phrase I heard from someone years ago, was just this whole idea of enough and just enough for today. And I didn't believe it at first, but I've come to believe it, that on especially stressful or difficult days, that I have enough for today. I don't know about tomorrow. I don't know about next week, but I don't have to know about those. I only have to know about today. And today, no matter how difficult it is, I have enough for today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Bruce.
All right.
Okay, we're going to take a little bit of a longer break now. We're going to come back in an hour and 10 minutes, and Beverly is our next presenter. So feel free to leave your screen on, but you can mute your audio, which is already muted, and you can turn off your video. Or if easier, you can leave and come back, whatever feels easier. But we are going to come back in an hour and 10 minutes, and Beverly is going to be our presenter then. Okay, thank you, Bruce, so much. And thanks everybody so much for your comments and for your sharing. It's great to be able to connect with you too. That is building energy for all of us. Okay, enjoy your break.